Hello, everybody, and welcome to FREDTalks and Guest. And as you can see, I've got a good friend of mine in the guest room today, Dr. Mark Walker from Lee University is with us and is going to be with us today talking about leadership and talking about one of my favorite subjects, and that is change. And I've asked him to deal with it kind of in a dual way. I'm going to ask him to talk about change and transition. And boy, has he been a student of this for the last few months. But as of August, we're really throwing you into the deep end of the pool, because at that time, you're going to begin serving as the 17th president of Lee University in Cleveland, Tennessee. Prior to his advancement as president of Lee University, he has served in a dual function. He served as vice president for ministerial development and as the chair of Christian ministries, that entire department. Before coming to Lee University, this is important because for those of you that are in the pastoral ministry that are out there, he's no stranger to your world. He served in pastoral ministry for 25 years at the Mount Paran North Church of God. Bachelor of Business Administration, and then a counseling degree, a master's in counseling from Georgia State University in Atlanta. He earned his PhD in organizational leadership from a place that I know pretty well, from Regent University. That's my alma mater as well, and the exact same degree. So I just love Regent University, and Dr. Walker has made them very, very proud. He's presently serving as the chairman of the Benefits Board for the Church of God. He served on the North Georgia Church of God State Council and on the Board of Directors for Lee University. Dr. Walker has also served on the Council of 18 for the Church of God and as the chairman for the Church of God National Pastor Advisory Council. So he has been chosen to help the Church of God and to be a part of the leadership of the Church of God at its very top levels. So Dr. Walker, we are so glad to have you. Now, I've asked you to deal with this topic of change and transition. Here's the three questions. Is all change the same? Is all change the same? It's been said that leaders sometimes initiate change, and that's what we call internal, and other times they have to respond to the change that comes at them. That's the external. You'll deal with that. Number two, is there a difference between what we call transition and change? It's been said that change in itself is the event or the occurrence that is changing, whereas transition is the internal, emotional, the personal, the psychological process of us adapting to that change. And then number three, how can leaders transition to new leadership roles effectively? And you've done that twice, two iconic transitions in the pastorate now at Lee University. So I can't think of a better person to deal with this. Good to have you with us. Jump in there and help us today.
Well, Dr. Fred, it's always a joy to be with you anytime I can be with you. And fellow cohorts and alma mater alums from Regent, it's always a pleasure to serve with you and anytime I can. You said I've been a student of change over these past several years. Sometimes I feel like I've been a victim of change over these last, and a survivor in many, many ways. But yeah, let's jump in and take a look at these things. Change. You mentioned it. All change isn't the same. A leader does have to initiate change. He or she may have to restructure or look at building a new part of their culture or creating new systems in order to better reach the goal or the vision or the mission they're trying to accomplish. I think it's also been said there's one constant in leadership, and that's change. Leaders have to look at what do we have to do to do the changes, the things that have to happen, and that's within a leader's control. for the most part. I mean, the leader's the one that he or she's the catalyst. He or she is motivating this change to take place, and that can be difficult when you're having to deal with status quo. People get comfortable. They most people don't like change, and when you find yourself dealing in a situation where you've got people as business as usual, that can go on for a little while and everything will be fine. But if you don't look to deal with that, to create what you need to do next in order to more effectively reach where you're trying to go and be able to adjust to things that are happening around you, which is the external change, then you can find yourself really working behind the eight ball, so to speak. You're working to catch up. So change that the leader initiates is within his or her control, but then there's the external change, as you mentioned a moment ago, the change that happens to you. It's outside the leader's control. That could be a real market shift, if you will, or it could be something of that nature where all of a sudden you find yourself having to react to something that you did not anticipate. And I think within what a leader is trying to initiate change, he or she is trying to reach the purpose that they have in a greater way. The disruption is for the purpose, in other words. The leader's creating the disruption for the purpose. Whereas when I'm dealing with something outside, I am dealing with the disruption that is threatening the purpose. So I'm having to, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
one, I'm disrupting to get our purpose better. The other is I've got a threat against that purpose. I've got to respond to it in order for us to keep going. And I think two great examples of initiating change is Dr. Khan, when he announces he's going to be stepping aside and moving to a chancellor role. I mean, that's him initiating change. Now, that's a significant change, mind you. But I mean, that's him seeing what's best for him, he feels, and what's best for Lee moving forward is for this change to occur. So he's initiating that. COVID-19, there's your external. You're talking about something that just came out of left field for everybody in any field, in any leadership capacity. Now, there's something that's threatening the purpose. Now, what's interesting in the situation at this time that this is being recorded with Lee is we were in the middle of the presidential transition initiating the change when external change came to hit.
Right.
In other words, this was something, the transition for presidency was the idea of, okay, this is what we think is better for the purpose and mission of Lee University. Now we have COVID-19 that's literally threatening
Wow.
that mission. So you've got both happening at the same time, which is very, very challenging, obviously.
Yes.
And we're one, you're trying to put the teams in place or the structures in place or whatever for the change to move forward, that being initiated by the leader. At the same time, that leader is having to make sure the structures and everything's in place that's going to prevent what's happening on the outside from us getting where we need to go.
Wow.
For Lee University, our great mission is, the main thing we're trying to do is we're trying to equip and train and develop students academically as well as spiritually to go out into the world and wherever God's calling them in their particular field, be his representative in that place. And we want them to be the best skilled, educated workers, leaders that are out there. And so COVID-19 threatens that. I mean, it happened here at Lee. All our students were on spring break.
Wow.
Now that's really a positive in some respects.
Right.
Because we just left them out there, if you will, so to speak. We didn't bring them back. Now, had everybody been here on campus, then we got to figure out how we're going to get them all out of here. So anyway, they're all on spring break. Okay, we got about 300 students on campus because those just didn't go anywhere for spring break. A lot of those would be international students, perhaps. Point of all that is this: all of a sudden, we're threatened as to whether or not we can continue our purpose, our mission, educating, teaching, because now nobody's in the classroom. So like so many people all across this nation and around this world, we had to shift to the Zoom platform. We shifted close to 900 in-person on-campus classes to Zoom in 3 days.
Wow.
Okay.
Goodness.
Now that's because of tremendous team, tremendous structures and systems that were in place for us to be able to do that. So while having to kind of stabilize all of that and move that direction, we're also having to look at what do we got to do to bring in a new president, transition out another president. So
now, let me just jump in here because, you bring up something that seems almost insurmountable because you have this internal, intentional change that's taking place that needs alignment and continuity toward the mission and the vision of the organization. But then all of a sudden you've got this external thing that comes in and disrupts, talking about disruption at a monumental level, a global level, right in the middle of that. So you have to adapt, and leaders have to adapt to the situation. And to hear you say you did it in 3 days, that shows tremendous resiliency, a great characteristic of leadership. Resiliency, being able to adapt and to come back from adversity and disruption quickly. How quickly can you do that? And that was about a team. Now, Dr. Walker, it's also been said that there's a difference between management and leadership. And management is about status quo, and you mentioned that. But when it comes to change, status quo won't work. Now, you got to have that. It's a both and. You got to have the smooth running of the organization, right? So you got to have management in its place. But during transition, like you're talking about, from Dr. Khan to you, from the disruption of COVID-19, it's not for wimps, is it? I mean, a leader's got to stand up and lead change. You have to make decisions in the midst of all of this turmoil.
Exactly. And it takes, you got to be sold on your vision. You got to be sold on your mission. You got to know this is where we're going. This is what we have to do. You've got to have a strong conviction, because when you have that, then you're not going to waver. And you're going to be able to take things as they come and be able to adapt and adjust so that those things are continuing to move you towards where you wanted to go. It's like, now I don't know anything about sailing very much, so I'm really out. I'm really way out of my zone here. I'm beyond my pay grade big time. However, I think I know enough about it to say when the wind shifts, you got to shift that sail to catch the wind. So it's the same because and you do that because you know where you're going.
Right.
But you can't go against the wind. You have to pivot in such a way that that wind helps you to move to where you're going. And I think it's the same thing. And if you don't have that strong conviction, you really don't know where you're going or you're waffling on it, then to be able to make decisions quickly, to align your team quickly, to get the people in place where you're going, it becomes very difficult to do.
Well, then what you're saying is that when this hit you and Dr. Khan and your team, then it is your core values
Exactly right.
that serve as your boundaries, that serve as, there's a lot of discretion, there's a lot of flexibility here. I can move with the wind, I've got to adapt, I've got to be resilient. But the one thing that stays constant, if I can use this biblical term, it was the bones of Joseph. You guys knew what the bones of Joseph were, you knew what your vision was, and you gotta keep going in that same direction. And that works in a pastorate, that works in a marketplace organization, that works in an academic institution, does it not? The importance of core values and that vision, both of which are huge components of leadership.
Absolutely. I mean, those are your guidelines. Those are your moorings. Those are the things that you hold to and are anchored to when this is happening. And that keeps you on point. It keeps you on direction. And see, one of our huge core values is probably Christ-centered is our number one core value. We want our students to engage Jesus Christ.
Right.
Which leads really to the second, and that's student engagement.
Yeah.
That is huge here at Lee. It's a core. When I first came to, now I was on the board of directors at Lee. You mentioned that in the introduction. I was on the board of directors at Lee, so I understood that this was a core value of Lee. But then it really wasn't until I came to work here 3 years ago that it wasn't just something that was lip service. I mean, they align for student engagement. It's all about how well we do in the classroom. It's how well we're interacting with students outside the classroom. It's about mentoring, coaching. Point being, that being our core value, when this happened, COVID-19 happened, and we realized we're not going to get our students back on campus anytime soon, and we've got to shift quickly. Every faculty member was bought in because this is what we do. We
Right.
engage students. Now, we have faculty members that, Dr. Fred, that they didn't even have Wi-Fi at home. They didn't even know how to spell computer, much less use one. So,
Yeah.
but watching these veterans of the classroom, these men and women who can make a in-person classroom just sparkle and just keep students captivated, step forward in uncertainty, fear because they've never done this before, and shift and figure out and learn and be willing to make mistakes and go on Zoom was phenomenal to watch. So inspiring, so moving. But when you're bought in, and this is what you know is what you are, then you make those sacrifices. It's not about you. It's not about you being embarrassed. It's not about you maybe not being able to perform at the level you're used to performing. It's not about you being comfortable. It's about, okay, we've got these students. They've just lost their semester. Dr. Fred, as I said, these students are on spring break. Well, most of them only took enough clothes and stuff for spring break. All their belongings are back in the dorms. And many of them were going into homes that weren't necessarily healthy home lives and those types of things. So when you know it's your students, that's what makes you who you are, and that's what you're about, then you do what you have to do at your own expense, at your own sacrifice to make it happen. So yeah, the core values.
Well, what you're talking about then is that resiliency that has to be there, and that needs to really be in the ideal situation available and prepared for in advance, because you don't ever really know when that outside change, that disruption is going to hit. So that's good training, that's good educating, that's good teamwork.
Exactly.
You just do the best you can to be prepared for that eventuality, which leads us to me asking you this second question. There's that personal component, isn't it? Because when you ask these professors, hey, move from the classroom to a new type of technology, when you ask students to say, you need to change your mental model as well so that we can keep this juggernaut rolling, your education, then that involves personal transition, psychological, spiritual impact. So is there a difference between what we call change and the internal aspects of it, transition?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know that be honest with you, until I made this change coming to Lee University 3 years ago, I don't know that I would have said there's a difference or seen much of a difference.
Right.
But having to have experienced it myself in this regard, the change, I left Mount Perrin North. You said in the introduction, I was there 25 years, but even more than 25 years, I grew up at Mount Perrin. That was my home. That was where I was raised from the time from a year old. Because my dad was pastor there 37 years. So it was my home. This was a church I got married in. My kids got married in. I dedicated my children. I dedicated my grandchildren. Had funerals for my grandparents, had funerals for my in-law. this was not just a place that I did work. This was my life.
Yeah.
Okay. And when Dr. Khan came to me and asked me to consider coming and taking the vice president role and chair role that you mentioned a moment ago, okay, it was a God thing in that I really felt called to do this. Okay. We make the decision, the change is going, the change happens, we come here. My head gets it. It's my heart that's got to catch up to it. This is my head can get the change. It's changing. I get it. My heart says I gotta have time to adjust. I gotta have time to adapt.
Right.
And I don't think I would have made that big of a distinction until coming here. I mean, I had to grieve.
Yeah.
My wife had to grieve.
Right.
We had to deal with the sense of loss. So many people whom we walked through so many things in their lives at Mount Perry North, and knowing the history of that church, knowing the history of so many people, and then coming to a place. It wasn't like I had no idea about Lee. I've been connected to Lee in a lot of different ways, but then I'm working here, and I knew the rhythms of being a pastor. I knew, and then coming into another situation, I don't know these rhythms. I don't, the worry of how am I going to perform well. I went from being.
So you're talking, Dr. Mark. You're talking here. That was change that you and your wife willingly decided to make.
That's right.
And I think it's important for our audience to hear this, because even though you may choose to make a change,
right,
that internal process can still be something that's hard on you and your family.
That's exactly right. And I think as leaders, we have to understand that. I had to allow myself to grieve, my wife to grieve. We had to allow ourselves to do the process while doing the work, while still.
Isn't that kind of like a yin and a yang?
Sure.
You're feeling excited about this new job. You really are excited to be at Lee and to be in this incredible opportunity and atmosphere. But then on the other hand, you're grieving. Wow.
Yeah. It's and yeah. I mean, and the beautiful thing about that is, the help of the Lord is one thing that helps you be able to navigate and sort through that, and the patience of leadership. Dr. Khan recognized that. He understood that, and I think I can speak for him in this. He's kind of struggling with that right now himself.
Yes.
And he knows this is what has to be done, and the change is happening, but the transition, he's catching up. This is 34 years of his leadership life here at this place, the university.
And similar to you, he's got a history there.
Oh, yeah.
His growing up, his father, his pedigree, if you will, kind of comes all along. And so he's having to release that.
Right. Yeah.
Just like you were having to release the Marietta, Mount Perrin, your father, and all of those memories. Wow. The similarities are profound.
They're strikingly similar, aren't they? It's very interesting. And I think too, going to a broader understanding of leading in change, when leaders are initiating change, they've got to allow people to deal with that change. Yes, you're making the change, the event, the occurrence, the system, whatever that is, but people have to have time to adjust to it. And leaders have to be very patient and flexible. I think leaders have to be very, very careful when they get to a place of saying, well, it's my way or the highway. Okay, maybe there are certain situations where that has to happen. I get that. But I think leaders have to understand, like even doing a building project. Okay, quick example, Mount Perrin North. right before I was leaving, we were in the process of looking at plans to totally renovate our sanctuary. Well, we had the plans put together. Hadn't gone to the congregation with it. We were just doing the preliminary stuff. That's when Dr. Khan came and talked to me, and it looked like I was going to be leaving, so we put that on hold. Okay. We make the transition. The new leader comes in. He picks up the plans. He goes forward, and they've done this beautiful remodeling. The sanctuary is totally different, beautiful. I knew that's exactly where they needed to go. But I was the one initiating it when I was there. But also at the same time, it's what had to happen. But again, that's where I dedicated my children. That's where all these wonderful things, and people at Mount Perrin North that were all behind it. They knew this is what had to happen. They were with the change. But I heard from several of them of how, it was difficult. It was somewhat painful. I remember I got saved at that altar right up there, and that's not there anymore. My family, I was healed here. And a leader has to allow that, and a leader can't be threatened by that.
Right.
Just because someone is disappointed or hurting, or it's, you can't say, well, you got to just get on board. No. You got to understand they're with you.
It's almost what you're describing. A leader needs to realize, and maybe this is where we can help some folks, has to realize that there is a little, can I put it this way, a little death that needs to take place. Actually, a burial, as hard as that sounds, not literally, you can visit, there's a lot of things that will remain the same, and you can create continued memories at this church with this leader and so on. Yet, if you don't put that to bed, that could be something that could derail you down the road. Am I right?
That's exactly right. That's why you've got to allow and make room for that part of change, the transition, the emotional, psychological part. You have to make room for that. Or it will. I think it will derail. People will get offended. They'll feel like, well, you don't understand where I'm coming from, whatever. So you have to factor that in.
I pastored for almost 30 years, and I left Oak Ridge, Tennessee, right outside of Knoxville, for People for Care and Learning. And, you had people that, wondered, well, why is he leaving us? Why does he not contact us anymore? Does he not care? Yeah. And you have to move on. You have to give the opportunity for the new leader, I like to say it this way, to get his feet in the stirrups, if you will.
Right.
And there's a place for you, but it's not the same place. And it's just going to be different. So there's not just your struggle. Sometimes it's your people. The people of the church are going to struggle. And they don't realize they're going to struggle sometimes until that new sanctuary's there. And then all of a sudden, the artifacts are not the same. And they're struggling with something going on the inside. So we as leaders, while we're struggling, we've got to help our people struggle as well.
Exactly. And acknowledge it.
Yeah.
I understand your struggle. I am too. You connect with it that way.
And I think sometimes we feel like that acknowledgement is weakness, but it's just the opposite, is it not?
It's sure it is. It's leadership. It's not weakness. It's strength. It's showing transparency. It's showing we're human. I understand that. This is not just some cold-hearted thing we're doing. It must be done, but we recognize the emotion behind it. And you talked about it, creating new memories. And I think that's a part of this. You acknowledge if loss is the right word, or you acknowledge the sense of loss, the sense of, it's different now, that type of thing, what I've had to give up to do this. You acknowledge, hey, I recognize the pain of that. But let's look and see what's going to happen here. There's going to be new opportunities for whatever. You show what can be, and these memories become even greater that we have. They become even more cherished, and you emphasize that. Right. But there's greater ones to come, and there's greater ones to come in your life. That kind of a thing. You recognize and honor the past while pointing to the hope and the significance of the future. It's interesting in Ezra. when they go, when they're the exiles that exiled into Babylon, they come back after 70 years and the temple has been destroyed and they rebuild the temple. And when they get the temple rebuilt, they have it's interesting. It says some rejoiced, but some wept.
Wow.
They wept because they had seen Solomon's temple. They were alive. The ones that were rejoicing, they were born in Babylon. They hadn't seen Solomon's temple. And it's interesting what it says, and it's in Ezra 3, verse 13. I've got it right here in front of me, Fred. It says, no one could distinguish the sound of the shouts of joy from the sound of weeping, because the people made so much noise, and the sound was heard far away.
My goodness.
So I think leaders have to be very discerning and understand you're going to have sounds of joy with change, but you're going to have sounds of weeping. And the sounds of weeping does not mean they're not with you in the change.
Right. That's going on. And what's interesting about that is that it's going on simultaneously.
Exactly.
It's happening at the same time. And for a healthy change and transition to happen, you've got to be cognizant of that and move on, which takes us into point 3. Because this is not your first rodeo. You transitioned, during the pastoral thing. Now you're transitioning into the presidency of a university. And then all of a sudden, boom, this global pandemic hits us, COVID-19, and you're hit with something from out of nowhere. So what is it that you think you're learning, Dr. Mark, as you move through all of this about change and your own personal transition?
I think I'm learning, number one, that I've still got a lot to learn.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, that I've got to constantly be open to learning new things. I think also I'm learning the idea of timing. It's interesting. They say timing's the key to everything. Timing in terms of, for instance, before COVID-19 came, I was selected. The whole plan was Dr. Khan and I would transition for 6 months. I would kind of live in his back pocket, if you will, as he would kind of mentor and coach and show me. All right. So I'm all excited about this, right? Well, COVID-19 hits. Okay. He doesn't have any room in his back pockets for me right now. His back pockets are filled with trying to get things. You understand? So it required me to have to back off or back up and recalibrate and be patient and understand that timing is critical here.
Yes.
Dr. Khan's got to batten down the hatches and plug the holes, and he's grabbing the folks that are best going to do that, right?
Right.
Okay. That's not the time when that's happening. You can't be transitioning in a new captain on the ship. You got to make, because if the ship sinks, there's no ship to transition to, right?
Yes.
And I think I'm learning to be respectful of that. He and I had an interesting conversation right in the time of this, and he came to me, he said, "No, Mark, understand, I'm not neglecting you, but I've got to do." I said, "Dr. Khan, I totally get it. I do. I've been through a couple of different crises myself. Nothing like this, but I understand that." I said, "But Dr. Khan, the leader in me is wanting to lead. Okay, the leader in me is wanting to lead," and he understood that as well. And I discovered in the idea of timing, the spirit is subject to the prophet, right?
Yes.
Isn't that what the scripture says? Okay, well, the leadership subject to the leader, I guess you could say. I had to learn how to just kind of rein that in a little bit, still stay in, quote, my lane, do what I had to do to help us keep the ship going, and the transition timing would happen.
Dr. Mark, this is happening more and more in ministry today, and in the marketplace as well. We're learning that transition, in organizational transition from one leader to another, it often works best when you can have that intentional choice. A pipeline, if you will, of people that you're looking at. You're trying to choose who's going to lead next. And then once you make that choice, then do what you and Dr. Khan have done. and that is bring them in for a time so that they can kind of get their feet in the stirrups. They can learn on the job training versus just being thrown out there in the deep end of the pool all of a sudden, which is kind of what we've done in the past. I remember going through that when I left the pastorate and went to People for Care and Learning and followed Bob Pace, an iconic leader who had done that for years, for decades. And he asked that I would come with him and be with him for a year. And while he was a great mentor of mine, a father figure for me, I miss him to this day. I know exactly what you're talking about. And I know that many people in our audience feel that same thing when you say, the leader in me wants to lead, but you're having to just be patient. And that's the thing to do, isn't it?
It's exactly right.
You cannot allow your pride or your ego to run amok here. You've got to be patient, and especially, my goodness, during what you've experienced and what Dr. Kahn's experienced with COVID-19.
Yeah, absolutely. You're hitting it right on the head there, Dr. Fred. I mean, yes, you have to put ego aside, pride aside, all of that, and just be patient and wait and learn. Keep learning. Be teachable. Keep open. And when the opportunities to lead are there, let the leadership out. Go lead. Lean into your strength, I think, is something too I've learned. I'm not just in this transition now that's happening, but coming from Mount Perrin North to Lee 3 years ago, the learning curve was huge, Dr. Fred. I mean, I had to learn the academia rhythms. I wasn't the lead leader anymore.
Right.
I was, I'd been the guy, if you will, so to speak. My wife said, "You've lost all your superpowers." I said, "Yes, I have." I became Clark Kent all of a sudden. That's all I was. There was no phone booth to go to, right?
I love that.
Yeah, and so learning that I lean into my strengths. So that's what I didn't come with that plan in mind, to be honest with you. I knew God had called me here. I mean, I don't want to be super spiritual in that, but it's the honest to God's truth. I just knew this is what He was calling Udella and me to, this. And so I had to hold to that. Okay, Lord, you've brought me here. You've chosen me for this, for whatever reason. I don't know the full reasons, but you've chosen me for this, and I'm here. Okay, I'm going to accept that reality. And I just began to learn, okay, the best thing I think I can do is really lean into my strengths. I'm an encourager. I'm a strategic thinker. I like to ask questions. I believe in team. And so I just leaned into those as much as I could. And then just learned. I wasn't afraid to ask questions. I wasn't afraid to make mistakes. I wasn't afraid to be embarrassed. That's what I just had to learn. I said, okay, Mark, if you're going to lead well here, if you're going to do what God's called you to do, you got to be willing to step out there. And again, it's swallowing pride, it's swallowing ego, all that stuff, and make mistakes and say dumb things and say things you don't even know what you're talking about. I mean, does that make sense? What I'm saying? I mean, that's you have to be willing to do that. And I think and acknowledge it. Acknowledge it when you make a mistake. Laugh at yourself. Right. Be willing to laugh at yourself. Be willing to show you're human and you're transparent.
It's like, if I can say this, we've only done this one time. This is the first time. I mean, you may have done something similar to this in transition, but we're all going through life the first time. Right. And I think that, and we all know from research and experience now, that the best thing to do when you don't know is to admit you don't know.
Exactly.
But you're still the leader. You've got to make the decision at some point based on the best information that you've got. Well, let me see if I can kind of wrap this up I think you said number one in terms, and I'm going to deal primarily here with your personal transition because I think this is important. Number one, you felt a calling to do this. I think that's very, very important. You need to know for sure that you're ready to make the transition, that you're ready to say no to this place you're at so that you can move into the next place. I think a lot of guys, a lot of women make that call when they're not really ready to do it. But you said you knew you were called, felt called. And here's the cool thing about that. I know, and you know, you were prepared for it.
Hmm.
You had been preparing for this eventuality. And so you fit. You felt that you fit this new role. We've all met people who did. Number two, you said you entered this new role with humility. Humility has been important for you. Yeah. And I think humility is huge for any leader because there'll be things that happen that will humble you. And you'd better be intentional about it. It's a whole lot better if you're intentional about it when the humility rock hits you than having it just pounce on you. The third thing was you're learning. You're not afraid to say, hey, I have a PhD. I'm at an age where I've got all this experience behind me. It seems like all this is perfect, but I'm still learning. And I think that's huge. We all have to admit that I need to still be learning, and I can learn from my team and for other people around me. And then the last thing here I think is important. You know who you are. It's easy to see that. You know what your strengths are. You haven't one time mentioned your weaknesses. And that's very important. I'm sure you know what they are. You've got your team around you for that. But in transition and change, you'd better know what you're good at, right? Because that's your go-to.
That's exactly right.
So summarize for us, if you will.
The thing I would say, Dr. Fred, is this: you be available, be willing, be confident. You said I was preparing for this. I didn't know I was preparing for this, but I was simply following where I believe God was taking me. I'm talking about all the way back when I got my PhD in organizational leadership. There's a whole backstory to that we could spend a lot of time on. I'm a messed up puppy, Dr. Fred, if you haven't figured that out yet.
Oh, Lord.
And so I think it's being willing to try new things, willing to step out there, being available to God to do this. You know, I won't get into all this because I know we're short on time. But I think of the 5 loaves and 2 fish the Lord took to feed the 5,000. You know, it's interesting. If you read the account in John, he tells Philip, go get food. Philip says, there's not enough food. There's no place we can get enough food. It's all, you know what he's saying? It's too difficult. It can't be done. All right?
Exactly.
Andrew says, hey, Lord, we got 5 loaves, 2 fish. He said, but this isn't enough. Andrew, what is Andrew saying? I don't have what it takes. I'm not good enough. The little boy simply says, hey, I got 5 loaves, 2 fish. Is it going to feed 5,000? I don't know. That's not my problem. That's the Lord's problem. The little boy basically said, as I am, with what I have, I'm yours. Wow. And what happens? He's a part of a miracle that feeds 5,000.
Wow.
And that's kind of been my approach. The Lord just kind of revealed that to me, and I've kind of stepped in here saying, as I am, with what I have, I'm yours. I think it's being available, be willing, being confident, and go for it.
Well, Dr. Mark, I know you've been an inspiration to me. You have been preparing for an eventuality you did not know was going to happen.
Yes, sir.
And that's the hand of the Lord on your life. I think all of us that are watching from the outside this transition, we're proud of you. We're proud
Thank you.
For you. And we all stand ready to serve and to assist with whatever it is that the Lord has for you and for Lee University. Thank you
Thank you.
for talking with us today about change and transition. I believe that we're going to help a lot of leaders out there that are involved in this. And we're in the midst of change. All of us have been thrown into that deep end of the pool. And I believe that we have talked about principles and ideas and practicalities today. We've been vulnerable. You've been vulnerable. Thank you for that. Thank you for that transparency. I look forward to watching what God's going to do with you and what God's going to do with your team and for all the students that we're launching into the world.
Amen.
Because God knows there's a future out there, if the Lord tarries, that's going to need trained Christian leaders.
Amen.
You're at the helm, my friend. Very, very proud of you. Thank you for being with me today.
Thank you, Dr. Fred. My pleasure. Love you, my brother.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've been with us today, Fred Talks and Guest, and my good friend, Dr. Mark Walter, going to be here in just a few months, the president of Lee University. So thank you for being with us. Remember, when you have a choice as to what to do, invest in you. As Titus tells us in chapter 1, verse 5, we're just putting in order the things that are lacking. Dr. Mark and I hope today that we've helped you when it comes to change and transition. God bless you.